So the world has always been crazy since it was hijacked thousands of years ago. But now it's becoming ultra, ultra crazy. Talking of which, is another example of the world's a lunatic asylum, really. Trans Canadian students to be allowed on teams consistent with their gender identity. Trans students in Canada are now allowed to compete on teams that are consistent with their gender identity after a governing organisation changed its rules. The new rule means that trans students in 56 third-level institutions in Canada will now be able to play as the gender that they identify with without getting hormone therapy or producing any other evidence that they are moving to another gender. It's just, I have a man's body, but I identify as a woman. The policy is in effect and says that students will only be able to participate in sports as one gender for a given academic year, and they must also comply with the anti-doping program. And it says these kids these kids of policies that don't seem to make sense are important. I think I most should say these kind of policies, shouldn't they? Are important declarations of support and assurance and inclusivity. Now, I did a meme for this for the website this week, and it says the end of women's sport. I wonder who'll win the weightlifting. And you see, this is what is in so many ways central to the conflict that's emerged now between feminists and transgender activists. In politics, for instance, transgender activists are demanding that transgender people in men's bodies who claim they identify as a woman should be allowed on all women candidate lists. So these candidate lists have been brought about under this heading of positive discrimination. What's the second word there? Discrimination. All right. Okay. Surely it should be on merit. And if people are not judged on merit, but by gender, then there's a frickin' problem. But people being selected just because they're of a certain gender, well, that also is not balanced. It should be done on ability and who you are, not what the kind of body you have. But anyway, that's a side issue. The point is here that feminists are saying, hold on a minute, these all-women candidate lists were devised to get more women into politics. So, which is a laudable aim in that sense. But hold on. If you're going to allow men onto those candidate lists just because they say they identify as a woman, well, that's going to be against getting more women into politics. Because what you're doing is getting people in men's bodies who say they identify as a woman into politics. So there's a conflict there. And what happens? The usual thing. The transgender activists say women that are challenging that are bigots and transphobic. Usual thing. In this factless society we now increasingly live in. So what's happened here with this Canadian decision is that men who say they identify as women can now take part in women's sport. Now, it's apparently transphobic to say that men's bodies and women's bodies are a different uh, a different gender, a different biology, but they bloody well are. And I refuse to say 2 and 2 equals 5, thank you very much. It equals 4, and I'm sticking with it. And we've got professors who've been at universities who've been sacked for pointing out that there are biological differences between men and women. It's true, it's factual, but it's against the agenda, so therefore you can't say it. 2 and 2 equals 5, okay? Now, we're now having the right of men with bigger, more powerful bodies to take part in women's sport. So where does that leave women in sport? How can they compete in events where the power of the body is highly relevant and have a level playing field? They can't. I mean, there's a transgender wrestler keeps winning the World Women's Wrestling Championship. Well, he's a bloke in terms of his body. Of course he's going to win it. But you see, as I keep pointing out, what keeps coming along are smaller and smaller victim groups that go to the top of the hierarchy of victimhood, therefore political correctness, and push others that were near the top before down. And women are now being pushed down by transgender. This is where the conflict between feminists and transgender activists. And notice I keep saying transgender activists, because genuine transgender people who are coming from a point of view, well, it's just how I feel, it's just how I am, and I'm going through the transition, or I've gone through the transition. They're not the ones that are driving all this. It's the activists. So when I asked the question there, the end of women's sport, question mark, of course, if this continues, certainly in Canada, it is in that sense, but wider. I don't think anyone think it's going to stay where it is in Canada. If you're allowing transgender men with powerful bodies to take part in women's sport, well, that's the end of women's sport. Because the women's ability to compete is deleted. And of course, achievement is not where you start, it's where you finish. If you start with loads and loads of disadvantages and you get to a certain point, the difference between where you started and where you finish, even though where you finish may not be a world champion or whatever, the difference between where you start and where you finish is greater than if you were born with great physical and societal advantages, and you do end up as a world champion. And so in women's sport, obviously they can't compete with men in the body powerful sports, but from their if you like, less advantageous in terms of body power position, they can achieve enormous amounts that compare with the achievements of men who have the advantage of a more powerful body. But you take that away by allowing male bodies, however they identify with themselves, to take part in women's sport, where their ability to compete and prevail is over. So when you talk about discrimination, what discrimination? Somebody this week has banned clapping because it might upset people who don't like clapping, a clapping anxiety. All right, well, what about people who do like clapping? What about their rights? Oh dear. My God, The world is a mental asylum. I rest my case. God, you go on forever with this stuff.